You are not stuck because you are weak. You are stuck because you built a place where moving forward feels dangerous. And the most disturbing part, no one put you there. You did. There is a kind of prison that doesn't lock from the outside. It locks from the inside. No visible bars, no guards, no immediate punishment. It doesn't look like punishment. It looks like prudence, like intelligence, like well-intended caution. It looks like planning, like strategy, like control. But little by little, almost without you noticing, it takes something essential away. Movement. At first it feels like protection. Then it becomes stagnation. And when you finally realize it, you're already walking in circles inside yourself. Today, at the Titan's Forge, we're not going to talk about self-sabotage as a moral flaw, not as laziness, not as a lack of willpower, because that would be shallow, unfair, and above all, useless for those who already live under constant internal surveillance. Today, we're going to talk about self-sabotage as an inner labyrinth, a labyrinth built by brilliant minds, sensitive minds, adaptable minds, people who think fast, feel deeply, anticipate scenarios, people who read the room before they even step into it. And to understand this, we need to return to a fragment of one of the most symbolic and dangerous myths ever created. Not because it speaks of monsters or heroes, but because it speaks of intelligence, the myth of Daedalus and the labyrinth. Most myths talk about heroes who defeat monsters, gods who impose fate, external forces that threaten humanity. This one is different. This myth speaks of a genius, and that changes everything, because Daedalus doesn't represent someone who failed. He represents someone who knows too much, someone who sees too early, someone who learns too fast, someone who solves problems others can't even formulate. This myth is not about ignorance. It's about intelligence without integration. Daedalus was the greatest craftsman of Athens, inventor, sculptor, architect. His mind was sharp. His creativity seemed to have no limits. He saw solutions where others saw walls, paths where others saw dead ends. But that same mind, capable of creating brilliant structures, also created systems too complex to be abandoned. And this is where the archetype begins to reveal itself. Daedalus represents that part of you that analyzes before it feels, that plans before it acts, that controls before it trusts. That part that has saved you countless times, that avoided mistakes, that reduced damage, that protected you when making mistakes was costly, when failure had real consequences, when exposing yourself meant losing something important. That part is not the enemy. It was born to protect. But now it may be holding you captive. King Minos makes an impossible request of Daedalus, to create a place from which no one could escape, a space that could not be overcome by strength, nor by courage, nor by persistence. A place that would defeat through confusion, not through violence. Daedalus accepts, and he builds the labyrinth, curves within curves, false entrances, paths that return to themselves, passages that seem promising and end exactly where they began. There is no shock. There is no direct aggression. There is no explicit pain. And observe carefully. The labyrinth is not violent. It does not wound. It only confuses. Exactly like self-sabotage. It does not bring you down all at once. It does not destroy your projects in obvious ways. It simply keeps you too busy thinking, evaluating, adjusting, waiting for the right moment. And while that happens, life moves on, decisions pile up, and you remain in the same place, believing you are being careful, when in truth you are only avoiding the risk of fully existing. Self-sabotage is not a lack of discipline. This needs to be said with force. It is not born from laziness. It is born from hypervigilance, from people who learned too early that mistakes had a cost, that failure had consequences, that exposure was dangerous. So the mind creates an elegant, silent, almost invisible solution. If I don't move forward, I don't fail. If I don't try, I don't lose. If I don't decide, I remain safe. These phrases do not emerge as conscious thoughts. They emerge as the echoes of Tartarus, repetitive subterranean inner voices that seem prudent but carry fear. They do not shout, they whisper, and precisely because of that, they are so difficult to confront. The labyrinth is born this way, not as a prison, but as a strategy. In Jungian terms, the labyrinth is a structure of the ego, an ego that learned to defend itself by anticipating the world. It creates plans, justifications, delays, alternative versions of itself. Everything seems logical, everything seems responsible, everything seems mature, but nothing happens. And at the center of this labyrinth lives the Minotaur, half man, half beast. In psychology, Jung would call this the shadow, the parts of you that were not accepted, not integrated, considered too dangerous to exist in the light of day. Anger, impulse, ambition, the desire for confrontation, the urge to break away. You did not destroy these parts, you merely locked them away. And what is locked away does not disappear. What is locked away learns to act in the dark. But why does the labyrinth need a monster? Because without the Minotaur, the labyrinth cannot sustain itself. In the end, it is the fear of the encounter that prevents the exit. Because you do not remain trapped, because you don't know the way out. You remain because you fear what you will encounter if you move forward. And there is a point about this that is rarely spoken, a point that not everyone has the courage to accept, an uncomfortable point. When you truly move forward, something in you needs to die, not your potential, but the story you tell yourself about who you are. While you are in the labyrinth, you are someone who will become, someone full of possibilities, someone who could be anything. When you leave, you become someone who tried, and that is irreversible. If something here is echoing inside you, do not rush past it. Stay. Observe the discomfort. Not everything that disturbs you is a threat. Sometimes it is consciousness knocking against the wall you yourself have built. There is another truth as well, and this may sound strange, but the labyrinth offers comfort. Inside it, you are not evaluated. You are not confronted. You do not need to prove yourself. Everything remains in the realm of potential, but unrealized potential does not inspire. It weighs, it demands, it turns into silent frustration. And in the myth, there is a final irony that almost no one notices. Daedalus too becomes trapped. The creator of the labyrinth becomes a prisoner of his own creation, not as punishment, but as coherence. Those who live only in the mind eventually no longer know how to leave it. Those who turn protection into a dwelling end up calling stagnation a home. And perhaps deep down, this is what the myth is trying to show you. If this resonated, do not consume it as entertainment. Let it work on you. Return. Listen again. The forge does not exist to comfort you. It exists to make you conscious. And consciousness is always the first step out of the labyrinth. This video does not exist to free you. Not yet. It exists for something rarer. It exists to show you that the labyrinth is not you, to show you that it was built, and to remind you of something we almost always forget when we remain too long inside mental structures. Everything that was built can be abandoned. But before leaving, it is necessary to recognize where you are. Before acting, it is necessary to stop confusing yourself with your own prison. Now we need to go deeper, not to give you ready-made answers, but to touch the root of the paradox. Why do the most capable people sabotage themselves? How does the shadow begin to act silently? And why has understanding by itself never been enough? There is a subtle moment, almost invisible, when the labyrinth stops feeling external and begins to operate entirely from within. You are no longer avoiding major decisions. You begin to avoid small ones, things that, from the outside, seem trivial. Replying to a message, finishing something simple, taking a clear position, making a minimal step. This is where self-sabotage becomes almost undetectable, because on the outside it disguises itself as exhaustion, as lack of energy, as overload, as too many demands. But on the inside, what exists is fear of direct contact with reality, fear of leaving the realm of possibilities and touching what is concrete, fear of confirming something about yourself. And this leads us to a question that is rarely approached in the right way. Why do the most capable suffer more from self-sabotage? This is not coincidence. It is something more unsettling. It is a pattern. Highly capable people tend to perceive too many nuances, to see consequences before their time, to anticipate possible errors, to imagine complete scenarios before even taking the first step. This ability, which once meant survival, begins to turn into containment, and then a silent paradox forms. The more you see, the less you move. The mind becomes so efficient that it starts blocking the body. Thought runs ahead, but gesture lags behind. The body hesitates. Action does not happen. Carl Jung said that the ego is born as an adaptation. It is not who you are. It is how you learn to function in the face of the world. When the environment demands premature maturity, the ego grows too fast. You learn to control emotions, to not depend, to solve things alone, to not disturb, to anticipate instead of asking. It works until it doesn't anymore, because the ego does not know how to live. It knows how to protect. And here there is a truth that relieves and confronts at the same time. You are not sabotaging yourself today. In reality, you are still protecting yourself the same way you did before. The problem is that the world has changed. The conditions have changed, but the mechanism remained. And the mind keeps reacting as if the risk was still the same. And while the mind tries to rationalize, the body remembers. Because self-sabotage does not live only in the mind. It lives in the body. It lives in the tension before acting, in the tightness, in the chest, in the sudden exhaustion when something is about to move forward. The body carries memories that never pass through conscious thought. It recognizes old patterns of danger and applies the brake. Not because you are incapable, but because you learned how to survive. At this point, the Minotaur stops being just fear. It reveals itself as repressed potency, anger that turned into silence, ambition that turned into excessive caution, desire that turned into rationalization, vital energy that found no conscious passage and began to act at the edges of the system. And when this force finds no outlet, it sabotages the whole. Not out of malice, but out of necessity for expression. The shadow, as Jung said, does not want to dominate. It wants to be seen. And that is why the most dangerous excuses never sound weak. They are sophisticated. They make sense. They seem responsible. They sound mature. They are well-articulated echoes of Tartarus, repeating phrases that have already gained the status of internal truth. Now is not the time. I need to think this through better. This isn't ready yet. Different in form. Identical in effect. They keep you exactly where you are. The labyrinth speaks the language of reason. It does not attack you. It convinces you. Inside it you feel control. Control over when you begin, when you stop, when you decide. But this control is illusory, because you do not control life. You only postpone the encounter with it. If you are recognizing yourself here, do not close this video. Not because someone is watching you, but because the discomfort arising now is not accusation. It is alignment. It is something internal beginning to reorganize itself. It is consciousness moving closer to the point where pretending not to see is no longer possible. In the myth, Daedalus does not fail out of ignorance. He fails by trusting only himself. He builds something so perfect, so closed, so coherent, that it becomes impossible to leave without external help. And this is deeply symbolic. There are moments when the mind alone cannot solve what it itself has created. Advancing in those moments feels like betrayal. Betrayal of who you were. Betrayal of the pain that shaped you. Betrayal of the version that survived when there was no choice. The labyrinth preserves that loyalty. But excessive loyalty to the past prevents life from moving forward. And over time, the labyrinth stops being just a place and becomes a character. You begin to present yourself as someone very rational, someone cautious, someone who prefers to wait. This becomes identity. And identities are hard to abandon because abandoning an identity feels like losing ground. But here we reach a crucial point. Consciousness without decision turns into sterile contemplation. Seeing the labyrinth is essential, but it is not the end. If you feel that something here is touching too deeply to be ignored, observe. The forge does not work with quick answers. A Titan works with sustained truth, and what comes next is not comfort, it is confrontation. Understanding the labyrinth does not mean leaving it, but without understanding it, you would never leave. There is a silent lie, perhaps the most dangerous of all, that keeps people trapped for years, sometimes decades. The idea that it is possible to leave the labyrinth without losing anything. It is not. It never was. Every real exit demands loss. And it is not a symbolic or poetic loss. It is concrete, psychological, identitary. You lose the safety of non-choice. You lose the comfortable identity of intact potential. You lose the elegant narrative of the one who has not yet tried. As long as you do not act, you can still be everything. All versions coexist, all possibilities remain open. When you leave, you become someone real, limited, imperfect, concrete, and that is more frightening than any imagined failure. But before action, there is something deeper, something that almost no one names, the internal decision to no longer hide again. It is not a grand promise. It is not an emotional oath. It is a quiet adjustment, almost too intimate to be shared. Even with fear, I will not pretend that I did not see. And this decision changes everything, because the labyrinth only works as long as you pretend it does not exist. As long as you rationalize, as long as the echoes of Tartarus keep whispering phrases that sound prudent, but only keep everything as it is. Now is not the time. It's not ready yet. I'll come back to this later, when I have more clarity. Because when you stop pretending, something subtle happens. Nothing external changes immediately. Your routine remains the same. Your obligations stay the same. The exhaustion may even be the same, but something internal shifts. You stop confusing yourself with the labyrinth. You begin to realize, this is a pattern. It is not me. And this separation is deeply liberating. Those who leave the labyrinth do not need an explosion. They need presence. It is not about breaking everything. It is not about becoming another person. It is about not hiding again. It is about sustaining contact with reality without immediately running back into the mind. And there is something the labyrinth hates intensely, simplicity, because simplicity demands direct contact. No long justification, no complex plan, no mental architecture. Simple life offers no shelter to the ego. That is why it feels dangerous. The Titan is not the one who destroys the labyrinth. It is the one who stops building it. They sustain the discomfort, the imperfection, without escaping into their own mind. That is silent strength. The forge does not exist to transform you today. It exists to remove the illusion that you need to transform before living. What we saw here was only a fragment of the myth, the exact point where the labyrinth is born inside the mind. Other keys will come, other falls, other crossings, but not now. The labyrinth has been seen, and once seen, it can no longer be obeyed without cost. The arena is already open, and in the next encounter, there will be no explanation. There will be movement. If something here passed through you, do not turn it into beautiful reflection. Come to the arena, like this video, as an internal signal. Enter the Titan's forge. And remember, you are not broken. You simply built a labyrinth to survive. Now that you see, the silence begins. Until the arena.